I never imagined I would be orchestrating my own surprise, but there I sat in the sleek West Village apartment that my husband had bought with our shared funds, yet not for us. The pristine leather sofa still emitted that unmistakable scent of new furniture. As my finger trailed along the armrest, I pondered the countless extra hours I had worked at the hospital to finance this luxurious love nest. A decade and a half of marriage distilled into floor space and upscale accents. The irony was not lost on me. Uncovering the property documents 3 days earlier while searching for our tax returns revealed a separate LLC, payments from our joint investment account, and a conspicuously concealed key marked office storage that granted access to anything but office supplies. The arithmetic was straightforward. So I took a course of action that any logical woman might consider upon uncovering her husband's real estate betrayal. I settled in before he did. Glancing at my watch, which read 7:42 p.m., I remembered from his schedule that Jason had a late dinner meeting with a client tonight. It was curious how these client dinners had multiplied over the last 8 months. The changes in him were strikingly amusing. The new cologne, sudden interest in fitness, and increased need for privacy during work calls. The elevator outside the apartment door dinged, and I heard two voices approaching. One male, one female, both laughing. I leisurely took a sip of the 18-year-old Macallan hidden in the kitchen cabinet, his exclusive stash he never brought home. Just wait till you see the view. Jason's voice echoed through the door as the key turned the lock worth every. The door swung open, letting light spill into the room, casting a silhouette of my husband with a woman I didn't recognize. Her hand rested comfortably on his arm, a gesture I once made before it faded from our marriage. Evening, honey, I greeted, switching on the lamp beside me. Welcome home, or should I say, welcome to your other home. The woman, petite and in her early 30s, exuded effortless beauty that clearly required serious effort, froze in the doorway. Jason's face revealed a mix of emotions. The transformation from relaxed happiness to shock to poorly concealed panic occurred in less than 2 seconds, as Chloe's voice strained when she managed to speak. What are you? How did you find the apartment? You've been hiding from me for 6 months, she said, as I stood up, refusing to remain seated like a mere visitor. The better question is how you thought I wouldn't. You used our investment account, Jason. Did you think I wouldn't get statements? I replied, watching as the woman stepped back slightly, clearly confused. Jason, what's happening? Who is this? She inquired. Extending my hand with exaggerated politeness, I introduced myself. I'm Chloe, the wife, the first property owner, you might say. And you are Megan, I whispered, but she didn't take my hand, her eyes darting between me and Jason like a spectator at a tennis match where both players were aiming at her. Megan, I repeated with a smile. Lovely to meet the reason my husband works so many late nights. Tell me, is the healthcare industry really that demanding, or has he been lying about his profession too, Chloe? As Jason tried to explain, I interrupted. What it looks like. Funny that. That's exactly what my mother said when she caught my father with his secretary. Family tradition, I suppose. I walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Beautiful view, excellent lighting, open concept. All the things I mentioned wanting when we were house hunting last year. I turned back to face them. Remember when you said we couldn't afford an upgrade, Jason? I guess what you meant was we couldn't afford an upgrade for me. Jason finally managed to push himself into action, gently guiding Megan toward the door. Maybe you should go, he murmured to her. Oh no, please stay, I insisted. You're as much a part of this conversation as anyone. After all, you've been living in an apartment I partially paid for. Megan's eyes widened. Married? Told me you were divorced. And there it was, the plot twist I hadn't anticipated. I laughed then, a genuine burst of surprised amusement. Divorced? Well, that's news to me. I've been preparing meals, washing your clothes, and sharing your bed for 15 years. Without any interruptions or legal documentation suggesting otherwise, Jason's face turned red. Chloe, please. This is not how I wanted to be caught, he muttered. I can imagine, I replied coolly. No cheater plans their own exposure party. Walking over to the kitchen island where I had laid out my evidence. Bank statements, property documents, and photographs of incriminating text messages. I made my point. I particularly enjoyed this exchange, I remarked, pointing to a printed screenshot. The one where you claimed I was emotionally unavailable after my father's death, using my grief as an excuse. That was a special kind of cruelty, Jason. The ensuing silence hung heavy in the air. Jason stood frozen, torn between his wife and his mistress. A man who had just realized he was standing on a landmine. So I said, forcing a bright tone, who wants a drink? We have a lot to discuss about real estate, shared assets, and the amount of alimony the court typically awards when one spouse misuses joint funds. The secret property where their affair took place was only known to Megan and Jason. Megan was the one to break the tense silence, picking up her dropped purse in disbelief. "I can't believe this," she murmured, her voice still with a mix of anger and humiliation. 6 months, Jason. 6 months of I'm almost divorced, and it's complicated." Jason reached out for her arm, but Megan pulled away, backing towards the door. "Don't touch me," she warned. "You told me you were living with your brother while finalizing your divorce. You said your ex-wife was bitter and trying to take everything." Megan scoffed, realizing the truth. "I made him breakfast this morning." Looking Megan in the eyes, I offered my support. "Sorry, I didn't know." "I believe you," I assured her. Megan seemed genuinely shocked. "But you should probably leave before you witness a homicide." With a nod, Megan quietly exited, leaving Jason and me alone. Jason's posture deflated as he headed towards the liquor cabinet, but I intervened, shutting it forcefully. "No, you don't," I said firmly, cutting him off mid-sentence. "You can't escape this, Chloe. Every moment will be felt by you. Let's discuss this rationally." Reasonably, the word felt bitter on my tongue. Was it fair when you said we couldn't afford fertility treatments due to market volatility while investing money here? Was it reasonable when I paused my career for your partnership? Was it fair when I supported you through your mother's illness, your failed first practice, your depression? Jason winced at each question. "That's not right. I was there for you too." "Were you?" "I remember being alone at my father's funeral while you took a supposed work call that may not have been work-related." He looked away guilty. 15 years, Jason. I devoted 15 years to you. 15 years of cooking, remembering names, planning our future. My voice trembled despite my attempts to remain detached. "Do you know what hurts?" He protested weakly. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" I demanded as he sank onto a bar stool, running his hands through his hair. "I don't know what happened. We got comfortable, stuck in a routine, and then Megan entered the scene as a new pharmaceutical representative. And she was younger, more exciting, not mourning a deceased father. I added, intrigued. Quietly, he admitted, she asked questions about me, seemed captivated by my opinions. "I know how pitiful that sounds." "You're absolutely right. It does sound pitiful," I remarked, leaning against the counter. "Because I've inquired about your day every single day for 15 years. I've listened to your opinions on everything from politics to pickle brands. But you stopped truly hearing me years ago, didn't you?" Confusion clouded Jason's face as he looked up. "A week before, I stumbled upon these documents. I mentioned that I was considering pursuing my master's degree. You nodded and said, 'That's nice.' I shook my head. 2 months later, you mentioned how great it was that I was content with my life." His silence confirmed what I already knew. He hadn't been listening. "What exactly did you start planning this? The apartment, the new life?" Jason shifted uncomfortably. "I wasn't planning anything. It just happened." A $500,000 apartment doesn't just happen, Jason. Neither does creating an LLC to hide assets from your spouse. I was confused, unhappy, and instead of talking to me, your wife, your supposed best friend, you decided to invest in real estate with our money and lie to another woman about being divorced. I crossed my arms. That requires multiple deliberate decisions, not confusion. He stood up suddenly, frustration raking through his guilt. "What do you want me to say, Chloe? That I'm a terrible person? Fine, I'm terrible. I made horrible choices. What I want is for you to stop acting like this was something that happened to you rather than something you did." The tension crackled between us as our 15-year partnership unraveled into bitterness. "You weren't happy either," he murmured, his words cutting through the air. "Don't act like you were. When was the last time you took the lead in our intimacy or suggested we do something together? You've been emotionally absent for years." His accusation hit hard, resonating with a painful truth. I had retreated, especially after my father's passing, consumed by grief rather than infidelity. "So your response to my emotional distance was to seek comfort in someone else and use our shared funds to buy her an apartment?" I questioned, my voice barely above a whisper. "Instead of discussing, seeking counseling, or honoring the commitment we made in our vows." Jason remained silent, unable to justify his actions. "What's truly insulting is that you didn't even have the decency to end our marriage before embarking on a new one," I continued, my words filled with restrained anger. "You wanted to keep me on standby while you tested out a shiny new life. Did you believe I wouldn't realize when we finally chose to make the leap? Did you expect me to simply vanish when you no longer had use for me?" "I never intended to cause you pain," he stated, reciting the all too familiar line found in the cheater's playbook. And yet, here we stand. I indicated the apartment around us, a physical representation of the hurt you've inflicted upon me. His hand reached out, a reflex born from years of closeness. I stepped away, my tone devoid of emotion. You forfeited any right to touch me, I declared. A flicker of recognition passed through his eyes, perhaps realizing that some boundaries, once crossed, could never be erased. What comes next? He inquired, fear threading through his words for the first time. I smiled icily, already calculating the path of destruction ahead. Now we negotiate the terms of your surrender. The following morning, I awoke in our shared bed, Jason absent after a night spent at his brother's. I had warned him that returning home would lead to a call to the police for theft. While not entirely accurate, accidentally using joint funds without realizing it was considered theft. Although he was unaware of that, I found amusement in seeing the panic swiftly spread across his face. I then swiftly texted Sarah, notifying her that everything was taken care of and confirming a meeting at 10. Sarah Jenkins wasn't just my closest friend, but also a renowned divorce attorney in Chicago known as the executioner in legal circles. We had met in college and remained close, even though my career had taken a backseat to my husband Jason's ambitions. Despite her offer to handle my case pro bono, I insisted on paying her full rate because this was not a gesture of charity, but a declaration of war. Her response came promptly. Office. Bring everything we discussed. Don't forget the business records. Couldn't help but smile, particularly at the mention of the business records. Jason believed he was clever in setting up an LLC to purchase the apartment, but his oversight was using our home address as the mailing address. Every financial statement and tax document had been delivered to our house, directly into my hands, as I managed our mail meticulously. While he worked late into the night, I took a purposeful shower and dressed in a cream pantsuit recommended by Sarah for its blend of confidence and innocence, the ideal courtroom attire. Though the actual trial was still months away, I contemplated the journey that had brought me to this point as I applied my makeup. Instead of confronting Jason immediately after discovering the property documents, I turned to my strengths: research. Over the course of 3 days, I delved into investigating his deception, piecing together a detailed understanding. To kick things off, I called in a favor from Connor, my ex-boyfriend from college who now worked in banking. With casual nonchalance, I inquired about an LLC registered to a specific address. Connor, who still held a torch for me evident even at our wedding, swiftly responded with critical information, including the LLC's formation date, just 6 months prior, its real estate holding purpose, and its primary funding sources, largely from our shared investment account. Additionally, he highlighted some suspicious large transfers that had taken place. We transferred funds from our joint account to Jason's personal account and then to the LLC. Following that, I reached out to the building management of the apartment, assuming the role of Jason's assistant. Dr. Warren requested me to confirm some maintenance details for the new unit. I confidently assured him that they had promptly provided the complete purchase history, which included the dates Jason had attended showings, coincidentally coinciding with his alleged medical conferences. Acting on Sarah's recommendation, I even enlisted a private investigator who documented Jason and Megan entering and leaving the apartment multiple times over a span of 2 weeks. However, the pinnacle of my strategy was a decision made 3 years earlier during the update of our estate plan. At that time, I insisted on including a fidelity clause in our postnuptial agreement, a detail that Jason dismissed as unnecessary but agreed to sign. Though I downplayed it as standard language, I had secretly requested our attorney to customize the clause to suit our circumstances. The clause itself was straightforward yet effective. If either spouse were to engage in Jason, who had been involved in extramarital affairs leading to financial impropriety, such as purchasing real estate for a lover, would have to relinquish 70% of all marital assets and the primary residence would become solely owned by the wrong spouse. Despite having completely forgotten about these terms, I remembered everything vividly. In my bag, I carefully double-checked for the postnuptial agreement, LLC documents, the private investigator's photos, bank statements highlighting the misused funds, and my personal favorite, a USB drive containing a video showing Jason and Megan entering the apartment with a clear date stamp. As I prepared to leave, my phone interrupted my thoughts. Jason, what do you want? I answered with a cold tone. So please, can we discuss this? There must be a way to work things out, Jason pleaded. Save your words for someone who still buys into your lies, I interrupted sharply. I have a meeting with my attorney in half an hour to begin divorce proceedings. Attorney? Isn't that premature, Chloe? Shouldn't we try counseling first? Attempt to work through this? Jason's voice reflected a sense of urgency. The time for counseling was before you bought a love nest, I retorted firmly. I discovered that our retirement fund had been used unexpectedly and became aware of the funds you have been diverting from the practice as well. Though mentioning it was a bluff, I could tell by his sharp breath that I had hit a nerve. I made a mental note for Sarah to investigate potential financial misconduct professionally. That's not what that was for, he stuttered. I decided to save any explanations for the deposition and ended the call. While driving to Sarah's office, I reflected on the discreet preparations I had been making over the past year. Even before finding the apartment, I had a feeling that something was changing in our marriage. I started my own bank account, began moving small amounts of my personal income into it, inventoried our assets, recorded our financial history, and rekindled connections in my professional circle. 2 months ago, I interviewed for a position in the Art Institute's restoration department, my original field before supporting Jason's career. They extended an offer to me last week. I hadn't informed Jason about it yet. On my desk lay my safety net, my promise of autonomy. No matter the outcome of the divorce, Sarah sat confidently in her corner office, embodying a legal expert in a sharp charcoal suit and vibrant red heels. You look surprisingly composed for someone going through a divorce, she remarked, inviting me to take a seat. I've been preparing for this scenario longer than you might think, I responded, revealing my evidence on her desk. For sharp, I always knew you were the brains in that relationship, Sarah complimented as she examined the postnuptial agreement. Our little insurance policy. Let's see if he recalls signing this. He doesn't, I confirmed. When I brought up divorce last night, he suggested splitting assets evenly. Sarah chuckled, how magnanimous of him to offer what the law would grant you anyway. As she reviewed the LLC documents, she remarked, using shared funds without disclosure. Classic financial deception. Courts frown upon that. There's more, I added, sliding my phone over. He consistently sent me his location data for the past 6 months whenever he stayed late at the hospital. The data now indicates he's at the apartment. Sarah, visibly intrigued, observed as we tracked his movements. Years ago, he had set up family sharing so I could monitor when he left work to come home. I mustered a wry smile. How ironic, isn't it? Over the next hour, Sarah and I devised a plan. She would file for divorce, citing adultery and financial misconduct. We would seek an emergency hearing to freeze assets, including the LLC and apartment. Meanwhile, I would diligently gather evidence and prepare for a career transition. What about the house? Sarah inquired. Do you want to keep or sell it? Reflecting on the memories tied to our shared 4-bedroom home and the garden I had nurtured, both happy and tainted, I made my decision. I want to keep it, I declared, not out of a desire to reside there permanently, but to ensure he realizes it's no longer his domain. Sarah nodded in agreement. That's my girl. Now, one last thing. She leaned in, a hint of anticipation in her voice. He's in for quite the surprise. Men like Jason panic when they realize what they're about to lose. They'll promise to change and beg for another chance. Are you prepared for that? I pondered the late nights spent waiting for him, the fertility treatments denied us while he funded his secret life, and the years invested in a partnership slowly hollowing out. Quietly, I declared my preparedness to spend my life with him, transitioning now to being ready to spend it without him. Sarah reached across her desk, squeezing my hand, reassured me, then let's make sure you get every penny you deserve. Leaving her office, my phone pinged with a text from Jason. Please come home, we need to talk. I can explain everything. I responded with a single message. I'm not the one who needs to find a new home. 3 weeks later, standing in the kitchen of our home, now mine per the temporary court order, I listened to Jason's increasingly desperate voicemail. Hello, please, the bank froze the Practice Act. Countess, I can't access anything. My attorney says this postnup might not even be enforceable. We need to talk directly, work something out between us. I deleted the message and continued chopping vegetables for my dinner, just one place setting now. The silence of the house no longer bothered me. It felt cleansing. The emergency hearing had gone exactly as Sarah predicted. When the judge saw the evidence of financial impropriety, not just the apartment, but also, as we discovered, nearly $200,000 Jason had diverted from his medical practice into personal investments. He'd immediately granted our motion to freeze assets and awarded me temporary exclusive use of our primary residence. Jason had been ordered to continue paying the mortgage and utilities while maintaining his own separate housing. The look on his face when the judge announced the ruling had been worth every cent of Sarah's legal fees. His attorney, a country club friend who specialized in tax law, not family court, had been thoroughly outmatched. Sarah, and they attempted to argue that the postnuptial agreement had been signed under duress, which was not true, and that the apartment was a legitimate investment property, although it was clearly not. My phone rang once more. This time it was Megan on the line. I had given her my number following our confrontation, sensing that she may have been just as shocked as I was. After a brief moment of hesitation, I answered, "Hello, Megan." "Hello." Her voice was tense. "I thought you should know something." "I'm listening," I responded. "Jason came to see me yesterday," she continued. "He claimed you were being unreasonable and trying to ruin him out of spite. He wanted me to testify that there was nothing between us until after you two were separated." I let out a bitter laugh. "Of course he did. And what was your response?" "I told him to go to hell," Megan replied firmly. I also informed him that I'm pregnant. The knife I was holding slipped from my hands onto the counter. "You're what?" 11 weeks. I found out right after that night at the apartment. I wasn't going to tell him, but then he showed up asking me to lie, she explained. For him and me, I simply couldn't keep it to myself any longer. The room seemed to shift slightly, the weight of Jason's years of reluctance to have children finally hitting me. After all the fertility talks he had put off time and time again, Megan started hesitantly. "I'm sorry. I know this is difficult to hear, but I thought it was important for you to hear it directly from me, rather than as a surprise in court." I held onto the counter for support, trying to steady my nerves. "Thank you for telling me." "What? What do you plan to do?" "I'm going to keep the baby," she replied firmly, "and I will be seeking child support. I don't want him back, definitely not, but this child deserves financial support from both parents." A laugh unexpectedly escaped me. "Well, you might want to join the queue. There won't be much left after the divorce." After a moment of silence, Megan hesitantly asked, Would you be willing to meet in person? There's something else you should know." And that's how I found myself sitting face to face with my husband's pregnant mistress at a serene cafe the following afternoon. Megan looked different, more vulnerable and real, less polished than before. Rather than vocalizing her thoughts, she wordlessly slid a manila envelope across the table. After Jason had departed my apartment, my mind wandered to what else he may have concealed, prompting me to conduct some investigation. Gesturing toward the envelope, she conveyed her discovery. "As it turned out, your spouse had established a consistent trend. Enclosed were copies of emails, social media captures, and what seemed to be dialogues from dating applications, all from Jason, all involving varying women spanning nearly a 5-year period." Megan spoke softly, revealing it wasn't just me. Uncovering at least 4 others, she disclosed that most engagements were short-lived. However, she revealed a significant relationship with a woman named Rebecca, which had persisted for 3 years. Astonishingly composed, I sifted through the detailed evidence. Puzzled, I inquired, "Why are you sharing this with me?" Megan took a sip of her herbal tea before responding. "Because he attempted to involve me in his deceit, because he painted you as distant and uncaring when it is apparent that you are the opposite, and because," she paused, her hand instinctively moving to protect her abdomen, "because I want my child to know that I chose to act with integrity." Even when faced with difficulty, I carefully observed her expression, hoping to detect any signs of manipulation or hidden motives, but all I could see was genuine weariness. "Thank you," I finally expressed my gratitude. "This information will be very helpful." Just as I thought our conversation was concluding, she hesitated before revealing another important detail. "Jason confided in me about his plan to falsely claim that the practice is failing and declare bankruptcy to avoid the settlement. However, I have personally reviewed the financial records, and the practice is actually thriving. He's intentionally concealing income." A slow smile crept onto my face. "Well, that is certainly interesting information." 2 days later, I found myself seated in Sarah's office as she carefully examined Megan's evidence. "This changes everything," Sarah declared, her eyes filled with a predatory delight. "Multiple long-term affairs, financial fraud, and planned perjury about the practice's value." She glanced at me, a determined look in her eyes. "With this evidence, we won't simply win, Chloe. We will utterly destroy him. What should be our next move? We need to bring in a forensic accountant to assess the practice, depose the other women involved." And she added with a wicked smile, "Persuade Megan to join our side in court." In the following days, the long-anticipated confrontation I had been dreading finally arrived when Jason unexpectedly appeared at my doorstep. His usually impeccable appearance was now disheveled and desperate. "Chloe, you have to stop this," he pleaded as I reluctantly opened the door. "The practice won't survive a forensic audit. Everything I've worked for will crumble." Leaning against the doorframe, I blocked his entry. "You shouldn't have built it on lies. Yes, I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but this vendetta will ruin us both financially." His voice broke. "Don't you remember the good years? Doesn't our 15 years of marriage mean anything?" I gazed at the man I had once envisioned growing old with, searching for any glimpse of the person I had loved. "It meant everything to me, Jason. That's why your betrayal is unforgivable." He then blurted out, Megan is pregnant, waiting for my reaction. "I know. She told me herself. Right before she revealed evidence of your other affairs," I replied calmly as the color drained from his face. "Rebecca, Eliza, Sophia, Lauren," I recited the names like a solemn recollection. "Do you still believe Megan was unique? The only one worth mentioning?" He slurred, almost losing his balance. "Chloe, those were—" I interrupted. "Don't bother. Your deposition is next week. Think hard before considering perjury as another regrettable choice in your life." Before he could reply, a car pulled up the driveway. Sarah emerged, accompanied by a man carrying photography equipment. "Perfect timing," I exclaimed cheerfully. "The appraiser is here to document everything in the house for the asset division. Remember our wedding china, the art we collected, furniture you insisted we needed? It's all being cataloged today." Jason looked on helplessly as they approached. "This isn't you, Chloe. This cold, calculating person. It's not who you are," he protested. Meeting his gaze unwaveringly, I replied, "You're right. It's who you molded me into." As Sarah and the appraiser reached the door, I stepped back, saying, "You should leave now. Your life is unraveling, and I wouldn't want you to miss a moment of witnessing it firsthand." With that, he departed without another word. Orge's shoulders slumped in defeat for the first time since uncovering his betrayal. I felt no joy at seeing him in pain, only a sense of satisfaction that justice was finally being served. 6 months later, I found myself in the gallery of the Art Institute overseeing the installation of the newly restored Monet. My role as assistant conservator had exceeded my expectations. It was challenging, rewarding, and entirely mine own. The divorce had been finalized just 3 weeks prior. Jason didn't contest the terms after facing overwhelming evidence of his infidelity, financial deceptions, and planned perjury about his practice's value. He surrendered without a fight. I was granted the house, which I promptly put up for sale, 75% of our assets, and gradually decreasing alimony over the next 5 years as I rebuilt my career. Despite keeping his practice, a forensic audit uncovered enough financial misconduct to trigger a separate IRS investigation. The West Village apartment I had been sold, the proceeds split according to the postnuptial agreement. I never set foot in it again after that first night. The memory of sitting in that leather chair waiting for my life to implode and transform simultaneously was enough. Megan had given birth to a daughter 2 months ago. We maintained a strange, cautious friendship brought together by shared betrayal, and now linked through a child I occasionally saw in photos but would likely never meet. Jason was minimally involved in his daughter's life, sending support payments but keeping emotional distance. Some patterns never change. My phone vibrated with a text from Sarah. "Drinks tonight to celebrate. That British curator you mentioned will be at Gibson's." I smiled. Sarah had appointed herself my re-entry sponsor into single life, insisting that 38 was barely getting started and that I had years of hotness ahead after being wasted on that cheating doctor. "Maybe," I texted, "backing installation here. Will let you know," as I directed the lighting. "Technician," as I adjusted the angle illuminating the Monet. I sensed a presence behind me. Turning around, I discovered Connor, my former college boyfriend who was now a banking executive, and had assisted me in uncovering Jason's financial deceptions. "The rumors are true," he remarked, glancing at the painting. "You did secure the restoration job." "It's been 6 months now," I replied, taken aback by his unexpected appearance. "What brings you to the Art Institute on a Thursday afternoon?" Connor explained that he had a business lunch nearby, but admitted, with a sheepish smile, that he had heard through mutual friends about my presence there. "I thought I'd see if you might want to grab coffee sometime," he suggested. Observing his familiar crooked smile, the innate confidence he exuded, and the shared history that existed between us, I carefully responded, "Coffee, you say?" "Just coffee for now." His gaze met mine directly as he acknowledged, "I heard about everything, Chloe. I'm sorry for what you went through." "Thank you," I replied. "It was a learning experience." Turning my attention back to the painting, I reflected, I learned what I'm capable of. Connor noticed that what I will never tolerate again reflects a woman who is sure of what she wants. Sounds like a woman who knows exactly what she wants, he remarked. Getting there, I conceded. Some days I'm still finding my way. We stood in a comfortable silence, admiring the moment, where the water lilies appeared to float on the surface, masking depths below. No coffee. Connor gently suggested, not yet. I decided, but maybe dinner next month when I'm ready. Connor nodded, respecting my boundaries without hesitation. I'll be here when you are. No rush. After he departed, I lingered in the gallery, observing visitors as they traversed through the exhibit, each interpreting the artwork differently. 6 months ago, I had envisioned my life unfolding in a certain way minus 15 years planned out with shared dreams and coordinated goals. Now, each day was a blank canvas shaped solely by my decisions. That evening, as I turned down Sarah's invitation and strolled alone through Millennium Park, I paused to watch a young couple in an argument near the bean sculpture. Wiping away tears, I watched as the man made emphatic gestures, his defensive body language speaking volumes. In that moment, I saw reflections of myself and Jason, the early disagreements I had smoothed over, the red flags I had ignored through compromise and concession. I was tempted to approach them and share my hard-earned wisdom about trusting instincts and setting boundaries. But instead, I decided to let them navigate their own journey just as I had found my own path. Returning to my new apartment with a view of Lake Michigan, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop to review conservation techniques for an upcoming project. As I worked, a smile crept across my face, not from sheer happiness, but from a deeper sense of satisfaction at reclaiming my autonomy. My concentration was interrupted by the building's buzzer, followed by the doorman informing me of a delivery. I discovered a package with no return address, inside which was a small, exquisite glass paperweight containing something that appeared to be. The red water lily, resembling the Mona that I had been diligently restoring, was delivered to me with a note that read to new beginnings and an assurance of no pressure to act hastily. Placing the note under a paperweight on my windowsill, I allowed the morning light to illuminate its message, viewing it not as a commitment, but as a potential path to explore when the timing felt right. That evening, as I gazed at the lake's tranquil surface shimmering under the moon's glow from my balcony, reflections of my challenging journey flooded my mind. The pain of betrayal, which once threatened to shatter me, instead empowered me to rebuild myself with greater resilience and insight. I had not merely endured Jason's deceit, I had triumphed over it. The version of myself who had dwelled in that apartment 6 months ago, overwhelmed with hurt and anger, had evolved. In her place stood a new woman who understood that the most significant promises we make are not to others, but to ourselves, to embrace fresh beginnings. Whispering my thoughts into the night and toasting in solitude, I acknowledged that I was now the sole architect of my own destiny. The audience that was once important no longer holds significance,